what would you say to somebody that's trying to get into this for the first time? Because it's very appealing. It's kind of like, obviously you get a lot more money than a long-term renter, but they don't realize the complexity of the business. So how do you, what would you say to somebody who's trying to get into this?
Yeah, I would say the one thing I really didn't like about long-term rentals and why I've now transitioned into mainly focusing on short-term rentals is that for long-term rentals, you don't have as much cash flow. Like you really, for every $1 million property, you're usually looking at maybe around $1,000 a month in cash flow. Whereas for a $500,000 Airbnb that we have, we can cash flow $4,000 to $5,000 a month. So it's very disproportionate in favor of short-term rentals when it comes to cash flow. So that's the main thing right now that we're focused on, is like obviously making sure that the portfolio cash flows, and banks also like that too. When the portfolio is cash flowing quite heavily, they will end up giving us more mortgages based on the debt to service ratio of the portfolio and how it's doing.
Yeah.
And have you seen what's your ideal? Because I know a lot of people are getting into Airbnb and they want to know, like, what is a good return? So kind of what do you guys look for in an ideal return in your situation?
Yeah, like it really does depend, but the standards that we have right now are 15% cash on cash ROI at a bare minimum. So cash on cash ROI is essentially just taking the annual cash flow and dividing it by the amount of money that you've contributed into the property for the down payment, closing costs, and renos. So that's one of our golden metrics. And so cash on cash ROI being 15%, and then total ROI being at least 25%. So total ROI is when you take equity ROI, appreciation ROI, and cash on cash ROI, and you add them together. And so those are the two gold metrics that we have for entering into a property. Especially now with the market turning, like cash flow is important to make sure that we're not having to take money out of our pocket every single month to contribute it to the portfolio.
Cool. And then what about setup? Because I know these things are, we've rented a couple this summer, actually, one in Manhattan Beach and another one up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is just areas that we wanted to try. And the furniture and the housewares and we had a maid come a couple of times. I mean, what these upfront costs are significantly different than the long-term, renter where they're just getting the space, right? So what are those like?
Yeah, it depends on what you're doing with the property. It really depends on like the level of property. So if you look at like, let's say a 1-bedroom condo in a downtown area that's going to cater to business travelers, traveling nurses, something like that, then usually you're only paying, $5,000 to $10,000 to just furnish the property, and it's pretty basic. And then if you get into like a larger, more like whole home listing, that's a lot of what we're doing these days. And we're getting cottages. So it's like a retreat for a family to go to, probably similar to where you guys would have went, something like that. And that can go upward quite a bit, because you can, like a lot of our properties, we're spending, $10,000 to $15,000 between getting the hot tub and the sauna set up, because we've got a pretty seasonal market we're in. We want to keep traffic coming there in the winter time. So we like to put in a hot tub and a sauna. And then with a larger home comes more furnishing. We've got, students that we work with that we kind of coach through everything. And we have one student that just bought a really nice big property in Arizona. That's his beautiful big property, but he went and renovated it. So there's like a movie theater in there. There's a golf course out, like a putting green in the back. There's like the pool that he's got all done up. So it can really range depending on the property that you're getting, but it certainly is a lot more, even beyond just the actual cash investment. It's a lot more in scope to just actually get it all set up than a long-term rental, because you really have to put yourself into the minds of the guests and make sure that that there's a frying pan there for them to use, that the night table has a night lamp on it, that kind of thing. Like all those little details really do matter.
Yeah. So how do you guys price these, and how do you decide what markets to go into?
Yeah, that's a big part of the kind of secret sauce to it, is knowing how to price the properties the right way. So like the pricing and then how to determine which markets to go into are sort of two different pieces. As far as pricing, we use a similar strategy to what a hotel company would use. Like really what you're looking at is you've got your targets for any given month out of the year, for exactly what your occupancy rate's going to be. And then you basically we just kind of reverse engineer that. And so we know, let's say in the high season, in August in our area, that's high season. So in August, our goal is 100% occupied. We want every night booked. Whereas in January, it's low season. So we might only be aiming for a 60% occupancy rate. And then we're just constantly, we have a team member, Jacob, who does all of our pricing adjustments for us. And he's going in there each week and just looking at where we're at relative to that goal up to 6 months out. And he's constantly, if we're overbooked to where we should be, then he's going to increase the prices so that we can get more bookings at the higher rates. If we're underbooked, he might drop prices a bit. And so he's constantly making these micro adjustments each week to make sure that we're not leaving any money on the table. I'd say that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they first get into hosting, is they see that $1,000 and they go, oh my goodness, I'd love to make $1,000 a night. And they go and list it and they get it. What they didn't realize is that the market probably would have supported $1,200 a night or $1,300 a night or $1,400 a night. And so they end up leaving a lot of money on the table.
So we have, a big event coming up in Phoenix in February. We have the Super Bowl here, right? And this goes for like any kind of big events all over the country. So you have all these people that are just starting to list their places on Airbnb, right? Because they're like, awesome, I'm going to figure this out or whatever. And the differences in price are astronomical. Like you have some people for a 3-bedroom house that are asking for, $400 a night, $500 a night. Then you have people that are probably more experienced that are trying to get, $7 or $8 grand a night, right? Because it's such a busy time and things are going to book up. And so in those situations, for those people that are, in Phoenix or another big town with a big event coming up, how would you recommend that they even determine the price? Because that's such a big scope.
Yeah, you just start high. Like we have this in Toronto when I was managing properties right in the core. The biggest event of the summer every year is Caravana Weekend. It's this big Caribbean festival that happens. And the way you have to look at it in scenarios like that, Super Bowl is a great example of this. The demand for those properties is going to exceed the supply. There's just going to be so many people coming in that every single property will get booked up. And there's still going to then be people that want to book them that can't. So there's not really hardly any risk of setting your price too high, because you can always lower it, right? If your property gets booked up at $400 a night, you can't very well I suppose you can, but it's not really in good faith to cancel that booking to try to get a higher value one. And you're going to get penalized by the platform. So I just wouldn't recommend that. You really want to start high. And if someone books, great, right? As you get closer to the event date, start slowly lowering your prices. Start to see where you start to get interest, where you start to get some inquiries, and eventually you will get booked up. Worst case, 3-4 weeks before the event actually happens, you can drop your price down to be in line with what you see other properties you're getting booked at. But there's no real risk with setting your price too high in that specific type of scenario, because there's just so much demand that every property will get booked up by the end of the day.
I understand you start high, but is that 6 months before? Is it a year before? And then, do you have a system behind that and just drop it like a month before and try to fill it, or what's the right strategy?
Yeah, the best strategy is to start at least 6 months out. If you're really looking to optimize, you want to start at least 6 months out, and then be gradually going in and adjusting your rates each week. Now, this doesn't have to be anything substantial. But you go in each week, lower your prices a bit. As you get closer to, depending on how aggressive you were with your pricing, you can start to look at, okay, like, maybe I'm going to drop off a bit more. So if you started at $4,000 a night, you're probably going to want to drop off more than if you started at $2,000 a night and we're working your way down. I personally, if it were me in that kind of a scenario, I would aim to be booked by 3 weeks out. So if I'm not booked 4 or 5 weeks out from the event date, then I would start getting more into like the realm of realistic. I'd probably have just just sky high pricing for the first few months. And then once I get 4 or 5 weeks out, then I'd start to get more realistic with it. And then just kind of hold there. If I weren't booked up by 3 weeks before the event, that's when I would start getting more aggressive about it and trying to really get it booked up.
What is a minimum occupancy that you guys would say, minimum rent and occupancy, because those are the two things that cover. Obviously your expenses are going to be whatever they are for that particular market. What is your minimum occupancy?
Yeah, we don't really have a minimum occupancy. What we like to look at, there's a few different pieces to our analysis. So what a lot of people don't realize, a lot of people look at short-term rentals and they automatically assume risk. They think it's risky because it's this mystery box of we don't know how well it can do. And a huge mistake I see a lot of people making when they analyze properties is that they often will go on Airbnb, see what places are listed for, and then do some like back of the napkin math to try to figure out, well, if it's rented for 20 days, then okay, we'd be doing this well. And the challenge with that is that all the properties that you see listed are inherently properties that aren't booked, right? So you don't actually know what those properties are going to get booked at. You just know what they're listed at, which, like we just discussed, you can list them for $9 a night or $9,000 a night. It's totally up to you. The other challenge is that also bakes in Airbnb's fee, right? Because they take a cut. And so what you really want to know is not what is the property listed for, but what does it actually get booked for? And what is the host actually getting from that? And so one of the resources, the tools that we use is called AirDNA. It's basically a data mining website where they grab all the short-term rental data for all properties all over the world from Airbnb and VRBO. So you can look at how properties actually perform. So the things that we look at as far as like a go, no go is, like Riley said, we always look for 15% bare minimum cash on cash. And that's in our like modest conservative scenario. So we like to support that with the averages for similar properties, as well as looking at specific comparable properties in that area to make sure we're going to achieve that. And then what we really want to see as well is that from running deeper analysis and digging more into the numbers, we want our worst case scenario. Like if things dive, if things drop down, if the property underperforms, we want to make sure we're going to at least cash flow at break even so that we're not out of pocket holding on to the property, and you're never going to be forced to sell the property. And in a lot of scenarios, we can achieve 20%, 30%, even 40% cash on cash. In like if we optimize the property, do really well with it. But we really are looking for in a conservative average scenario, we want to hit that 15% number. And in a worst case scenario, we want to hit at least break even. As far as how we get there, it doesn't really matter to me if we're booked one night a year to hit that, or if we're booked, 365. Like the path to get there is going to vary depending on the market, is in terms of like what combination of occupancy rate and nightly rate gets you to that end revenue for the year. Some areas like California is a great example. It stays pretty consistent all year round. It's pretty steady. There's a bit of an up season and a down season, but not too much. Whereas if you get up north, like where we're at, or in like upstate New York, things like that, you end up having these, you'll see the up months will do 3 times better than the low months out of the year. And that's fine as long as we know to expect that and we save our cash flow and make sure that we're holding on to that, because we know that in the down season, things are going to drop.